Yeah. All right. So this is the workshop with the title "Dealing with Self-Harming Behavior." I when I was asked to create workshops for No Name Kitchen, I had the idea that from when I started in March this year to be an external psychologist for No Name Kitchen, I made the experience that self-harming behavior is something that occurs in the squads and within like people on the move, and that this is something that leaves a lot of people, let's say, incapacitated, like not knowing how to deal with this, and kind of brings it out of action. And that's why I thought this might be interesting for people in the field. um, but I have my ideas on that. I have my experience from working in a psychiatric hospital, which is totally different from working with people on the move, but having experience with people who show self-harming behavior. Um, but of course, I would like to hear what you might have experienced before, or what your expectations of this workshop are. If some of you want to share, not necessarily everybody needs to say something, but if you want to share something or tell me your expectations, then I know what I will be dealing with, and we can see if this fits together with what I've planned. So feel free to tell me what you are expecting.
I can go first if nobody
Yeah.
else wants to do so. For me, I mean, self-harming behavior, I think, has been something both professionally and also like in personal situations that I've encountered. I I think specifically in the situation on the field or like with people on the move, a lot of the things that we talk about in like normal psychological contexts don't really apply so much, or you don't have the same resources. So I think on one hand, just having the basics when it comes to self-harming behavior is really important, but on the other hand, also specifically looking at the situation on the field and how things that you would maybe normally be able to do could or could not be applied in the context, is something that I find quite important, because obviously it changes things if you don't have a psychiatric hospital with a lot of mental health professionals around you, um, to support people who are going through this.
Okay. Yeah. So so the question of what you can do on the field. It's like, okay. Anything else? Any other ideas or anything else you guys want to share before we start?
I mean, from this month on the field here so far in BH, like the part of self-harming behavior that I was thinking about was a lot of maybe in the category of not taking care of yourself, but in a very strong extent. Like a lot of people that I talk to that start, oh, like, I didn't really smoke much or didn't drink back home, but here in this situation, I've just started because I need to take my mind to another place. That people, they just drink, for example, they go on game and they drink a lot of energy drinks to make the game, and then they come back home and they've drank them all the time, so they keep on drinking energy drinks. And most people, they stay up all night. They go to bed at 10 in the morning or something, just trying to watch something on YouTube to like take their mind off where they are right now, and we are not having a not being able to have a healthy routine, and being taken to a further extent, and in the way being self-harm.
Okay. I will definitely get on like the definition of what self-harming behavior is, and like self-neglect is of course harmful. And I when we come later to the part how to approach somebody who is showing self-harming behavior, a lot of these things also work out for different let's say, less severe cases of self-neglect. But I will show you in the beginning what the definition for me, like psychologically or in theory, is of self-harming behavior, so that we know what we are talking about. And then if there's still something missing for you, please feel free to ask. And then we can see how we build this in the workshop, maybe later or tomorrow. Okay. Anybody else wants to go? Okay. I take this as a no, then I will be starting. Okay, so this is the workshop. Welcome, and thank you for your interest. Wait, this is not what what was supposed to happen. Still not. No. Okay. I tried like this. So hi, this is what's supposed to be next. I'm Fabian. I live in Hamburg. I'm currently in training to become a psychotherapist. I studied psychology for 8 years, and I worked the past 2 years in a psychiatric hospital, and right now I'm working in a clinic treating patients with psychotherapy here in Hamburg. Before I did that, I worked for 5 years in a shelter for homeless and refugees here in Hamburg as well, which of course is completely different from people on the move, but there are some, of course, parallels that what people told me when I was working there as a social worker from being on the move. So I wouldn't say that I totally understand what you guys are doing, but I have a general idea of that, maybe. Again, okay, I have to do it like this. This is what I was supposed to be doing with you today. I want to talk about what self-harming behavior is, like from a theoretic background, differences in between different forms of self-harming behavior and definitions. Then get into some psychological theories, why are people showing self-harming behavior, and talking about risk factors which are making people more prone to be showing this. And by the end of today, like around 5, we should also have been acquiring some knowledge about why self-harming behavior is problematic and when. Then we have a break until tomorrow morning at 10, and I'd like to talk about how to address self-harming behavior and how to engage with a person who's showing self-harming behavior. I hope this works out, that we can have breakout sessions, and maybe like after all this theoretical input, try to have some practical exercises that you can do with each other. And I think it's also a super important part to talk about coping and self-care for volunteers or for whoever, what your position is after you encountered self-harming behavior, because this is very stressful from my experience. All right. Here we go. So in the classification of self-harming, if I hope you can all see this okay, it starts with self-harming thoughts and behaviors, and these are again divided by non-suicidal and suicidal, so with the intention to die and with no intention to die. And I won't be focusing on suicidal, like on the suicidal side, because this is a complete different thing. So, and there's also like suicidal ideation, so people thinking about committing suicide. Maybe then the next step would be attempted suicide and having suicide plans. This is one side. The other side is there is no intention to die, which also includes the threat of suicide, self-harming thoughts and impulses that are like left in the head, in the idea. And this is what we'll be talking about, non-suicidal self-harming behavior. So this is like, I will be calling it NSSB because for short, because I think I will twist my tongue if I say non-suicidal self-harming behavior over and over again today. And that might be a bit stressful for me. So it's the direct and intentional destruction of one's own body tissue without suicidal intention. So about what Leandro said, or your friend, I'm not sure.
Jakob.
Jakob. Okay, yeah. All right. What Jakob said about self-neglect. This is of course harmful, but this is not included in this. It's more passive, right? So if you don't wash, if you don't care about your nutrition, if you smoke a lot, these are things where they are harmful, but there is no direct intention of harming oneself by doing so. There might be exceptions, but what we are talking about is actual damaging of body tissue with the intent to damage body tissue. And this definition is important because we have to like kind of accept or see that this kind of behavior is a conscious decision with a determined intention. So I really like the example of self-neglect, because this is something, this does not necessarily mean, wait, someone new coming in. This does not necessarily mean if you neglect yourself, the harm, the damage that is done is not something that might be intentional. But if I cut myself, if I burn myself, this is something, there is an intention to be destructive, to hurt myself. I hope this is important to keep in mind, because this is also important once we approach somebody who's showing this kind of behavior. I wanted to say this earlier on, but I just remembered now. If any of you made your own experience with self-harming behavior in the past, or know people who showed self-harming behavior, and maybe you disagree with what I'm saying, or sometimes some things seem a bit harsh, be assured it's not my intention to hurt anybody's feelings. Like, this is for me personally, it's a topic that I think it's super important to deal with this in a decisive manner, because which we will find out during the course of the workshop. It's very important to provide a framework or orientation for a person who is suffering from conditions that lead to self-harming behavior. All right. Self-harming behavior does occur very often. So, like from the studies that I found by researching, it's around about 20 to 25% of adolescents harm themselves at least once during the course of their young life. And with most individuals, self-harming stops at a certain, like by the age of 20. There are different theories to that, that it might be a part of subculture, that this is trying new things, cultural influences, whatever. This is a very broad thing. So if I'm telling you this because if somebody shows self-harming behavior, this, of course, it's important to be aware of that and to deal with that, but it does not necessarily mean that there's an underlying problem. Sometimes this is something that occurs and disappears because somebody was curious, and sometimes it's not so easy for the person to explain what actually happened and why they do this. So and this is where you already see how difficult it is sometimes to deal with this. It's important to take it seriously, and by the same time, it does not necessarily mean that you need to rush things once self-harming behavior occurs. Here are some example of what NSFB means. Like, it's about cuts with razors or knives, scratching, like scratching with fingernails or with other objects, bite oneself, to sting oneself with needles, or not necessarily syringe needles, but like sewing needles as well. Hitting oneself with objects, or pulling hair, or hitting walls or tables. Burn oneself with fire, or also with acid. To scald oneself with hot liquids, or to pick up some skin, and also to delay healing of injuries that might occur not by self-harming behavior as well. Any questions so far on what I've been talking about, or anything missing? Okay. Now I try to provide you with some theoretical framework. There are different approaches on theories that I wouldn't say that like they have, it's different approaches to explain why self-harming behavior occurs, and they all, like the theories that I collected here and I will show you, all seem valid to me. Does not necessarily mean that everything applies to every person. And I will start with the classic conditioning. Maybe some of you already know the story of Pavlov's dogs. It's a very old psychological experiment from sometimes in the late 19th century, where Pavlov showed food to a dog. They started to emit saliva, and he rang a bell, and they didn't. And then when presented both together, they of course started to show mouth watering, and then after that it was enough to just ring the bell for the dog to water his mouth. And this is a way that this is one of the basic learning theories, that, for example, if you showed self-harming behavior before and you see the tool that you use, this, which is connected to the self-harming behavior, or to the sensation of cutting oneself, this might trigger the urge to cut oneself again, because you see the blade, which is, like in this case, the blade is the bell, and the urge to cut oneself is the food. that's like one simple version of classic conditioning, but this mechanism might also work for emotions as a trigger. So if a person shows self-harming behavior when in a certain emotional state, like being sad or angry or frustrated, then this at some point, and whenever they are sad, they cut themselves. Feeling sad might come together with the very big urge to cut oneself. Do you understand what I'm going for here? Is this clear so far? Okay. This is like classic conditioning, very basic form of learning, and very, very simple explanation. Then there's another learning theory of positive and negative reinforcement. And these examples of positive and negative reinforcement, which I showed you, it's like positive reinforcement means that a behavior is followed by a desirable event. Like when your parents give you money for good grades, then it might be, or it might be more likely that you put in more effort to get more good grades in order to earn more money from your parents, for example. A negative reinforcement is that your behavior ends an undesirable event or state. For example, you take a pill like an aspirin to relieve a headache, and when this works out every time that you take the aspirin once you have a headache, it makes you more likely to take aspirin once you have a headache. So to take the negative thing away. And I think we will all find a lot of examples that work for us when we look at our life, that we either negatively reinforce ourselves by taking things away, or positively reinforce ourselves in order to achieve pleasantness. And this is also works for self-harming behavior. So there is social positive reinforcement that follows after self-harming behavior. For example, social interaction, because a person who hurt themselves or cut themselves gets more support than before, or we spend more time with that person, we comfort that person, which might be things that they urge for. And this is also important to remember for later when we talk about how to approach and how to deal with self-harming behavior in other people. That might lead to a person feeling less social interaction or the need for more social interaction, and remembers or learned that once they showed self-harming behavior or the result of self-harming behavior, like scars or fresh cuts, they get what they were longing for, like comforting or more time spent with them. It also has another social positive reinforcement part, like there's non-suicidal self-harming behavior might lead to more physical interaction, like comforting by hugging, or also wound care, which from what I gathered is something that a lot of the guys on the field lack: physical interaction and social interaction. And there's also social negative reinforcement. So for example, once a person showed self-harming behavior, by comforting or by let's say pitying a person, peers might be less demanding towards that person, because they have a cut, or they showed us how that they are feeling, so we might be less demanding towards them, or an unpleasant treatment stops. Does this make sense to you so far? Okay. So this is the social part of, yeah, yes.
The last thing, I'm not really clear what you mean about it. Can you explain a bit by what you mean by less demanding?
I can give you an example from the ward where I was working on the in the hospital. So we asked people to take part in day-to-day life, and sometimes when a person showed self-harming behavior, this was really bad on, like, psychologically, therapeutically, and pedagogically speaking from our part. They weren't asked to keep on doing what they did before. Like, if there's a hard part of work in therapy, for example, and the person starts to cut themselves, then we talk about the cut and not about something more complex, like changing dysfunctional behavior. Because then you're back to stop cutting yourself. Why did you do this? Let's analyze the situation, which still is demanding, but it's less demanding than to start reassessing your coping with certain feelings. Or in a, I don't know the situation in the squads, but I can imagine if people have certain tasks and somebody has a cut and maybe has how do you say, can't use the arm anymore. People are demanding less from that person because they need to rest and heal. Or it can even be like, if you see that somebody apparently has a lot of trouble or a lot of problems, which is shown by self-harming behavior as a manifestation of psychological problems, then it's a logic consequence to be less demanding towards somebody who's displaying psychological problems. Is this more clear now, or did I make more confusion? Okay. These things, if this happens, it's not a bad thing. It's kind of normal. This is what we do. We see somebody is in trouble and we want to help them. We see that somebody is distressed and we try to stress them less by behaving differently. And I will say this later again, but it's important to stress this point. Self-harming behavior rarely occurs with the purpose on manipulating us, or not us, but manipulating the world around you. It occurs mostly because people have emotions that they don't know how to deal with, or experience things that come back to them in intrusive thoughts or flashbacks or in nightmares. And if you tried a lot of things and you don't know what else helps, and feeling pain makes this go away, at least for a short while, this is kind of a logical consequence. And it's important, this part, like negative reinforcement, social negative reinforcement, is not something that happens first and then non-suicidal self-harming behavior occurs. The self-harm occurs, and it does not go away when things like this happen. It's a bit like, there's first the self-harming behavior, then we, like I say we all the time, the surrounding reacts to that, And depending on how the surrounding reacts, this might reinforce by either being supportive or hugging. And if this occurs many times, then a person might be more likely to show this behavior again because the consequences are positive, without necessarily saying, oh, I cut myself in order to get hugged. But once I cut myself, I feel better later. Or once I cut myself, I feel less bad because I don't have to do chores, or don't have people don't pressure me about things. And then a behavior that occurred, let's say, out of the blue, might be more likely to happen again. If things are getting confusing, that's because, in part, maybe because I'm myself confused sometimes, and maybe it is because human behavior is confusing. So, and that's something that we won't be changing by having this workshop. I'm just describing how it goes. We're still talking about positive and negative reinforcement. So we talked about the social part, and there's like automatic positive reinforcement. Like I said before, if people feel numb because they experience so many distressful things that their mind shuts down and they don't feel emotions anymore, nor negative nor positive emotions. Pain is better than numbness. I don't know if anybody of you ever experienced the feeling of like emotional, like to feel empty inside. And from people who experience that, most say this is like feeling nothing is worse than feeling bad things. And so if you see this as a hierarchy, pleasant feelings, of course, are most desirable. And feeling nothing is like on the really bottom, and pain is still better than feeling nothing, because yeah, from the stories, or from the stories that people told me, it goes so far that if you feel numb for a long time, that you start to question if you actually exist, or if you're a person, or the person that you think you were. So it's it's a big step to say, I'd rather feel pain than feel nothing. And sometimes I will use the word now, but I don't like it that much in this in this connection. The rush that people have after hurting themselves also comes with positive emotions sometimes, or it feels like an achievement. I talked to a patient for a very long time, and that person told me that like we talked a lot about self-harming behavior, and tried to figure out how she could stop it. And at some point she said, whenever she does it, and she has like, sometimes people find ways that are good cuts or bad cuts, and if you do a good cut, then you have this feeling of achievement in a life or in a world where you are not able to achieve anything. So if you don't have a job, if you don't have anything, you can have this feeling that some of us might even get by just crossing things off our to-do list. Achieving something like a nice cut makes people feel good, and makes it more likely to do it again, because it's something that you don't need much resources for. Any questions on that? I'm sorry. Should I have provided a trigger warning that we are going to dark places of the human mind today, or did you expect this anyways? If it's getting, I got used to this, and I'm not happy to say that I got used to this, but if things are getting too tough, you need a break, please let me know, and then we can breathe, have a drink, have a tea or something, and go back into the abyss after that. So this is automatic positive reinforcement, automatic because it's happening within the person showing the self-harming behavior. And there's also automatic negative reinforcement, like I said before. Cutting might not lead to a positive feeling, but it might decrease in negative emotion. So feeling less sad or less angry or less frustrated for at least for a while. And again, these are factors that might make non-suicidal self-harming behavior occur more likely. Okay. There's another model that's called like experimental avoidance model. Experimental because it needs to be tested out in the scientific area, which basically states that self-harming behavior is used to avoid or to end unpleasant emotions, or thoughts or body sensations, or even unpleasant situations. Like sometimes inmates or people who get arrested get out of jail and into infirmary because they hurt themselves, which is not necessarily much better than being in jail, but it ends the situation of being in jail, for example. Or if people pressure somebody into doing something and they cut themselves, most times the situation is over after that. So some people use self-harming behavior in order to end unpleasant sensations. And so this is providing more evidence towards the negative reinforcement part of self-harming behavior. I'd like to talk about this. What we talked about now is once self-harming behavior occurred, how might it reoccur again? And it does not necessarily mean that self-harming behavior needed to occur before and then. So, for example, positive reinforcement, positive social reinforcement, and automatic positive reinforcement might occur when I don't know, hurt myself by accident. And if a person makes the connection that, for example, they get much more attention and also physical attention once they are hurt, sometimes it starts like, then they hurt again, they are less caring, doing risky stuff. And yeah, to be treated like this, and at some point this might lead to intentional self-harming behavior. But this is different for each individual. Talking about risk factors, like factors that make people more prone to show self-harming behavior. This first one is something that we could discuss for the whole workshop, which we could of course do, but okay, I'll talk about this. Let's say there's a genetic predisposition, or we can put genetic in brackets, but there's a disposition for strong emotional and cognitive reactability. That means I don't know if some of you heard about this concept of hypersensibility. So it basically says some people are more emotionally and cognitively sensible than others. For some people, even like a slight change in facial expression throws them off in a conversation. And it does not necessarily mean that you are angry at them. But if I'm sitting here talking to you and this is cognitively exhausting, and you start to look exhausted, and I be more reactable to that, I might think that people start to dislike my seminar. And even people with this predisposition are very sensitive towards changes in facial expression, for example, and also to their own emotions. So we have a range from people who don't feel much and don't have a big range of emotions to other people who to react very much to small changes within their emotional household, let's say. Another risk factor, and this is something that might comes with counts for a lot of people on the move, is childhood trauma, or and that includes being an adolescent. Another one is an insecure self-concept. So if I get this right, a lot of the guys in the squads are in their early 20s and started to be on the move since they are 12, 13, something like that. Is this right? Is this about right?
I would say that
These
they're younger, maybe, huh?
Even younger?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so yeah, that's supportive for the argument. Adolescence is a time where most, like, if you are having a healthy surrounding and you, like, everything works out fine, this should be the time where you can build your own identity and learn about yourself and try things out. But when you are put into a harmful situation for a long time, there's not much time to build secure self-concept, because you have to protect your basic needs. And there are different people. Some people are more vulnerable to this, other people are not. It depends on peer groups that people might have even during being on the move. But an insecure self-concept, so if people are not sure who they actually are, is a risk factor for self-harming behavior. Same goes with depression and anxiety. These kind of factors are called distal factors, because and now we are talking about the distance towards the self-harming behavior. You might completely understand this on the first try. I didn't, so I explained to you what my problem was when I tried to understand this. Because to me, these risk factors are much closer to the person themselves, right? So it's more close to the mind, to the psyche of the person. And then I was thrown off by these risk factors being called distal. This is why I put it farther away from the self-harming behavior for which it is a risk factor. If I confused you now, then just scratch what I said and go back to when you were not confused. If this was helpful, then you're welcome. Any questions on that so far? All right. And then, yes.
Can you maybe give maybe you will give an example for that? Because it's a bit confusing, yeah.
For the distal risk factors?
Mm-hmm. It's a bit
the ones that again?
It's a bit abstract, so it's a bit, I don't know, difficult to understand something.
Okay. We are talking about the risk factors for self-harming behavior. So these factors that are within an individual's character or mind or in their upbringing are further away from the actual behavior, because this is something that comes with the person. Like childhood trauma, something is these are this is the set of character traits that the person brings to the table before showing self-harming behavior. And it's called distal because it's not necessarily, these things are not connected to behavior. They might manifest in behavior, but they not necessarily need to. So I can be insecure about my self-concept and without showing this in my behavior. Maybe it's getting less confusing when we talk about the proximal risk factors. If not, we can go back to this again. Let's try this. Because proximal risk factors are more like immediate triggers. So a person who has a higher emotional reactability is more likely to but let's say all of us are not highly emotionally reactable. We are still having strong unpleasant emotions every now and then. And these are called interpersonal vulnerabilities for self-harming behavior. For example, I can be a very resilient person, and then I have a very, I don't know, let's say, a very strong emotional connection to a person, and that person breaks up the relationship. This gives me a very strong and unpleasant emotion that because I don't know how to deal with this in another way, I might end up hurting myself because I don't know what else to do. A person with a higher emotional reactability might even be having such a strong unpleasant emotion by, one of my patients told me they get super sad and angry if their cat just jumps on the laptop and walks across the keyboard. And that in that case leads that person or led that person to self-harming behavior because they have a higher emotional reactability, which is further away from their own behavior. But the immediate trigger is the cat comes up and walks across the keyboard and destroys the email that they were writing for a while. So this is more proximal to the so strong unpleasant emotions or also thoughts, unpleasant thoughts are interpersonal vulnerabilities, a lower stress tolerance as well, and there is also a theory that people with an altered pain perception are more prone to hurt themselves because it doesn't feel as bad as it would be for somebody with a regular pain perception or not altered pain perception. And then there are also, like, this is what happens within one person, within one individual. And then there are interpersonal vulnerabilities, like low communication skills, which can be, on the one hand, if people haven't, like, if we all use the same language and were brought up in the same culture, we still have maybe different levels of communication skills. But also, if I live in a country where I can't read the language, where I can't talk to the locals, and I'm the only one who speaks my language, this is also a low communication skill in that case. And that makes, and I don't know if you experience that with people who are not native speakers or who can't speak the same languages as you do, that sometimes you get angry because you don't get the message across that you would like to get across, because you know what's in your head, but you are just not able to. This is important to me because there's either people haven't learned how to communicate in a certain way, but also if you're theoretically able to communicate very well what your needs are or what your feelings are, but you can't because you don't share the same language, this can also be an interpersonal vulnerability. So it has nothing to do with intelligence or social skills in general. It can also just be language barrier, for example, or cultural barriers. And the same goes for the low problem-solving abilities. There might be that I didn't learn how to solve certain problems because instead of learning things from my family, I've been on the move for a long time, and I couldn't learn problem solving from experienced elders. But it can also be that a problem could be solved by having access to medical service, but if you don't have papers and you don't have the access, you can't solve this problem of having a toothache, for example. Or if you're not able to go to an ATM and you can't buy food, then it's really hard to solve this kind of problem. Is this clear so far? So both communication skills and problem-solving abilities might be something that people are differently skilled in, but even a very skilled person in communication and in problem-solving can have low communication skills in a certain situation or low problem-solving abilities in a certain situation because the surroundings keep them away from using their actual abilities, which can even lead to more frustration than from somebody who doesn't have the basic set of skills in that case. Okay. Now we put this all together into one very nice integrative model of the development of self-harming behavior, and it's a perpetuation. It's basically all that we talked about. We have these distal factors that are within the person from the start, like the predisposition position for emotional cognitive reactability, childhood trauma, the things from their upbringing, the insecure self-concept, or mental disorders like depression or anxiety, that both have an effect on interpersonal vulnerabilities, like having more strong unpleasant emotions and thoughts. Like each of these points can lead to this. Having a lower stress tolerance and or an altered pain perception, which, like if we talk about depression and people feeling numb, this might also lead to this altered pain perception. And it has also, like, these distal factors have a influence on the interpersonal vulnerabilities, like we talked about, the communication skills and problem solving. And these two react with each other. And from there, it goes to a stress response. Like all this can lead to stress, and you have challenging social situations, for example. Living in a tent with a lot of people you don't know, without any shelter from police, for example, is a very challenging situation. Being constantly living in fear of being deported or to be harassed can lead to emotional over excitation, and this part of disrupted neuropsychological activity. This goes, for example, if people can't sleep a lot or can't have like nutritious meals for a long time, or like this might disrupt neuropsychological activities as well. So this goes back to the self-harming behavior, which also has an influence on the interpersonal vulnerabilities and on the interpersonal vulnerabilities. Like after hurting oneself, there might be secondary emotions like feeling guilty or feeling angry about oneself or being sad that you hurt yourself, which again might lead to interpersonal vulnerabilities, or also if there's a new problem that you created yourself by hurting yourself, it makes it maybe harder to solve other problems. Take a look at it, ask if there's something unclear or confusing again, and I hope to be able to explain it in a different manner maybe. Or if you just have a question, feel free to ask. Do you find some examples for the different points, especially in the interpersonal vulnerabilities or the stress response or the interpersonal vulnerabilities from the people on the move, from your experiences from the field? Maybe we can use your examples from the field and to put some practical terms into what's here theoretically. Do you have an example for strong unpleasant thoughts that that you heard or that you were talking about with the people on the move that you know, Marina?
I mean, generally, I think I can find examples in all of these different categories that apply to especially people on the move. When it comes to like interpersonal vulnerabilities, I think the last time that it was, for example, in Sheet, a really big topic was when the situation in Afghanistan, for example, was really, really stressful and really dangerous for people. So I imagine, I mean, if we look at strong unpleasant emotions or thoughts like being scared of like for their families is like, I mean, pretty obviously a very unpleasant emotion or comes with very unpleasant thoughts. I find it interesting that it states there a low stress tolerance, because I think in general people on the move have such a high stress tolerance. I think it just gets too much at a certain point, like how much stress can a human being be able to withstand before something happens, or before certain behaviors maybe become the alternative that is more doable than anything else.
Yeah, and this is also a great example, like when you talked about the changing situation in Afghanistan, that people were more with their families or with the people who they know are in this changing situation that that is stressful and makes it's a stress that you can't manage. And so more stress, low stress tolerance does not necessarily mean that the person has a low stress tolerance. It might, if some people are different, and within the people on the group of people on the move, there are different levels of stress tolerance for sure. But this lowers once there's more stress as well. Anybody else, or do you have anything where you're not sure where to put it in this model? An example from your field experiences? Yeah, go for it.
Maybe there's also kind of a difference between if you're scared for the life of your family or if you are scared for your own situation. I think this is also pretty complex. I also have an example for somebody who is super much scared now about his own. I mean, yeah, everyone is scared about the own future, but there's one guy that knows exactly next time that police will catch him by doing the game, he will end up in detention camp for the next 3 months. And it's very clear that at one point police will talk to him again. So yeah, also this feeling of being stuck, and I imagine this also is a very stressful thing.
Where would you put this on the model?
Just because you asked for strong unpleasant thoughts, I can't imagine how it is like to know I will be in jail by doing nothing wrong.
And these unpleasant thoughts might also lead to the emotional over excitation, right? Like the more stress or the more unpleasant thoughts you have, at some point this might overexcite you. All right. Anybody else wants to contribute? Marina?
Yeah, I think one aspect that I don't really, or maybe it's just that I don't know where to put it, but it's like kind of the social aspect of self-harming behavior, or like how it becomes like a culture in itself sometimes in certain groups. So for example, I don't know, I'm friends with some people on Facebook, and I sometimes see like pictures, for example, that are posted on Facebook kind of glorifying this kind of behavior, or I know that this is something that also goes on in the squads within certain groups of friends, that they, and this is not just a phenomenon between people on the move. I think if we go into like, I don't know, certain blogs or something like that, where this is also glorified. So this is like kind of an aspect of self-harming behavior that I don't know if it's represented in this model.
It is not necessarily represented in the model. Okay, you can, with some fantasy, you can fold it into low communication skills. Maybe if you say that, I talked about this earlier, in automatic positive reinforcement. For example, if you see self-harming behavior as an achievement, and people glorify that, and in a certain, let's call it scene of, or in a group of people who at some point agreed to glorify this, then you get not only automatic positive reinforcement within yourself, but also from the others when you share pictures and you say, look how, like, this is a bigger cut. I can take so much pain, for example, or yeah, I don't find examples of what people might why this is glorified, but this is something where you have this achievement part, right? And yeah, might be also, and this is I want to mention it, but it might go too far for the time that we have, but also part of toxic masculinity, that like being immune to pain, or showing how much you can take, is glorified, or gives you the sense of achievement. Yes.
Yeah, I think for me another aspect is that this is in some communities a socially acceptable way of showing inner pain. Like it's more socially acceptable to self-harm, and by self-harming show that there's some hurt or some pain going on, rather than just saying, yeah, I feel like absolute shit because of this and this. Or maybe, I don't know, this is my feeling when I've talked to people, or when I try to understand like why people are doing that or sharing pictures like that on social media.
So would you put this into low communication skills then?
I mean, I don't know. I think from my point of view, yeah, maybe. But this is also like a very maybe Western kind of view that or like a very, I don't know. I sometimes struggle. Obviously, self-harming behavior is harming behavior, like no doubt about that. But like the way we talk about emotions is very socialized, or we've learned it in a certain way. So I sometimes struggle to say that it's like somebody has low communication skills if they just have different ways of maybe showing emotions or something like that.
No. Again, low communication skills or low problem solving skills, this is not supposed to be judgmental. But when, for example, when you talk about there is more to the emotional world that the person shows by saying I'm in so much pain, I would not say this is low communication skills, because they should be better at talking about their emotions. It's because they might lack the common language in order to do so, or the common ground to feel safe enough to talk about this. So low is a word that sounds very judgmental, but it's like see it more like a low temperature that's not judgmental, depending on what you like. But yeah, it's not supposed to be judgmental. It's about there can be more to communication, or there can be more to problem solving in a functional way, and not in a right or wrong way.
Yeah, then I would agree if we see it like as in lack of alternatives to communicate.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. But very nice input. Thanks for that. All right. So far, so good on this model. Anything comes back, or if you, I don't know, if you later tonight or this evening look at this again, or think about this again, and there's questions, there will be time for that tomorrow as well. So we have this big model, and then there's another part of self-harming behavior and dissociation. Dissociation is something that it's one of our psychological skills, let's say, that we use every now and then. It's as well not a bad thing, not a good thing sometimes, but it's like not being judgmental about this. For whoever knows how to ride a bike or to drive a car, once you ride your bike through on somewhere where you usually go, and you don't have to think much about where to turn, and think much about the keeping on track or not falling off your bike, then you're actually dissociating the act of riding your bike from, because you're not doing it consciously. Or when you drive on the highway for a long time, I don't know if you ever had this experience. I know for sure that I did. When you write for hours and hours and it's going just straight, at some point you would be like, did I just like sleep for the last 20 minutes because nothing happened? This is something our mind kind of wants to be stimulated, and if there's nothing stimulating, then we kind of shut off and still work. So by knowing that you didn't remember what happened for the past, let's say 10 minutes, that's more realistic, on the highway, and not having crashed, that means that you drove and you were somehow aware of what you're doing, but you dissociated from that. So this is a good thing, because otherwise we would bore ourselves a lot. Dissociation also happens with things that are unpleasant. It happens, this is a symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder, of traumatized people, because like I said earlier on, a traumatized person might relive the traumatic event through nightmares or intrusions or flashbacks. And like I said before, our mind really likes to be stimulated, but in a way that our minds find pleasant. If there are intrusive thoughts or flashbacks for coming back to us that we don't have control over, one reaction of our mind, if it's stressed out, is to shut down and dissociate. So there's something happening and we just blank. And this is also, it's a mechanism to save ourselves from these kind of unpleasant thoughts that are perceived as life-threatening. But it's also very unpleasant for people experiencing this. And sometimes traumatized people show self-harming behavior as a dysfunctional tool to end this kind of conditions. There's like to end flashbacks or intrusions, or this feeling of not being there, and being in a dissociative state. Because what happens with a traumatized person that relives the trauma that was in the past is that somehow there is the traumatizing event is not perceived as something that ends or that had ended and is over. So these things feel like they are actually happening in the present. And the pain that comes with self-harming behavior works as a signal to connect to the present. So in a very tiny and less dysfunctional way, this is something, I don't know if you know this expression, that if you're not sure if you're dreaming, or if you're not sure if you're in a nightmare or something nice happens, that you say, can you pinch me so that I know that I'm not dreaming? This is basically the same thing working. The pain should be a signal to know that I'm actually in the present. Is this understandable so far? All right. So we talked a lot about the function of self-harming behavior and why people are doing this, to understand what are reasons to constantly or to show self-harming behavior more than once. So there's the big question, or even if this helps to get out of a dissociative state, why is the problem? Why do we think people should be stopped from showing self-harming behavior? Or I don't know, do you think people should be stopped from showing self-harming behavior?
I mean, maybe speaking just from a selfish perspective, not even about the person, it's really upsetting to the people around the person.
Okay.
And maybe because we have I don't know, more people have a natural urge to stop people being in pain, or to prevent people from suffering. And that's a really obvious way to see in that it seems very causing harm also on a longer term physically.
Yeah.
And
So
also, excuse me. Yes, self-harming behavior seems like very irrational, no? So, well, that can happen in like in a moment of stress and in a really like impulsive and irrational way. So in that sense, if someone can help you to cope and deal with the situation, and I think it's a good thing. And a totally different thing would be to like rationally and to decide if you want to live or not. No, that's another thing. But this, I think, help and collaboration and it's important, of course.
It's a difficult question, and I'm asking you this because, and I put you like in the situation to think about this and maybe not feel too pleasant about answering or not being sure, because this is my experience from, or this is something you might experience as well when you talk to people about stopping their self-harming behavior, that people tell you, why should I do it? And if you say, because I don't like you to be hurt, this is not necessarily, like, it just might work as well, but it's important to have arguments for that. And like I said earlier on, dealing with people who show self-harming behavior needs to have like a certain amount of this, or like a certain way of decisive behavior. And this is why, on the one hand, in my opinion, it's super important to understand why this is occurring. This is what we did now theoretically, to understand what factors lead up to a point where a person says or decides, this is the thing that I do now. Because, like I also said in the beginning, self-harming behavior is intentional and decisive. So it's not happening that I suddenly have a cut on my leg or on my arm, or that I burn myself with a cigarette. This is something that takes a lot of effort to actually hurt ourselves. And once a person crosses this step, it's sometimes tough to go back and go to change this again. So it's super important to understand why this is happening and to have a non-judgmental way of understanding, and also to understand or to know why it's problematic. And of course, you don't have to find this out yourself, because this is part of the service that I provide today. Basically, it's like all the things that you said are included here. It comes with a lot of, like, there are very high costs for very low results. Especially in the squad, so for people on the move with less or no access to healthcare, it's a big health hazard, and it's a risk to the immune system, because things can, like, wounds can get infectious, and this can even be potentially life-threatening by infection, but also most people who let's not say most people, but there is a risk, or there is, like, within the realm of possibilities, when you cut yourself, for example, or if you hurt yourself, it can also be, this can cause an injury that is life-threatening for example, if somebody cuts a big artery, they can die, even if this was not intended, or if they hurt themselves, fall down, drown, whatever. Like this is like it is potential life-threatening, and this is a big cost or big price to pay. It comes with it triggers secondary negative emotions. I mentioned that before, like shame or guilt or being angry with yourself. And then when we go back to the model, we can see this enters the vicious circle of you show self-harming behavior, and then there are strong unpleasant emotions and a lack of problem-solving abilities that lead to emotional overexcitation, and then in order to relieve this, people show self-harming behavior again. And this goes on and on and on. This is what actually happens a lot. When we look at it as, for example, for traumatized people with these dissociative states, self-harming behavior loses the effectiveness really fast. So that means either a person needs a higher frequency of hurting themselves or more intensity, which again, the more intense the pain needs to be, the riskier the injury comes. And using a dysfunctional coping style to deal with emotions and unpleasant thoughts prevents to process these thoughts and emotions in a functional way. So sometimes people use self-harming behavior to like really cut away negative or unpleasant emotions. And even if self-harming behavior helps to go through a traumatic experience, because of all the learning models that we talked about earlier, it might prevail through even after the traumatic experience ends. So, for example, like I told you that I worked in a refugee camp in Hamburg. There were some people who still like being relatively safe, being in Hamburg, having a shelter, having a roof over their head and access to healthcare and so on. They still showed a lot of self-harming behavior because this was something that they learned to as a reaction to negative thoughts and emotions. Are there any further questions on that, or do you want to discuss about something? Because this would be like the end of today. Do you have a big knot in your head that needs to be untied, maybe? Is there something missing? Like, does it all make sense to you so far?
So dissociation in relation to the flashback. So it's the person experiences an intrusion or a flashback, and this causes dissociation from sort of the present moment, and the person uses NSSB to bring them back into the here and now with the self-harming behavior. Is this the process?
It's a bit like it's a bit difficult to access because if people are dissociating, most times they don't know what happened before. This is like it's a super unpleasant situation. People, let's say you like a trauma memory was triggered by a smell or a color that you saw. That all these things can trigger memories, or yeah, something very basic, and triggering trauma memory means a lot of stress for your brain, and basically it means I'm potentially in danger to die. And if this happens in a situation that was not perceived as dangerous before, one reaction could be dissociation, so that the person just fades out because this is too much. And this might be after triggers. It might also come as a reaction to flashbacks because this is also too stressful, and then the mind shuts off. And there's I had one of my teachers gave me a very nice measure tool to talk to patients about how much they are dissociating or not. And this is something that might also be helpful when you talk to somebody and you have the feeling that they fade away. So let's say my head is, I'm completely in the situation, I'm aware of everything, and then I take my arm, like this, and I can say, how far away am I from the present, or from being aware? And I don't know, if you're listening to me talking, maybe you are this far away from yourself because you are not necessarily completely in the moment, and that's okay. But as soon as it goes further than your elbow, then you need to do something in order to not drift away so much. And for some people, they automatically already know that they are drifting away, and then inflicting pain by NSSB is a way to end this, to come back to themselves. Is this answering your question?
Yeah. Or can you repeat that thing with the arm? I didn't get the start of it.
Come again?
Can you repeat the example with the arm? So you stretch out the arm to measure what?
So that when I talk to you, for example, and I want to know how far away from the present situation, or how far away from being aware you are right now, I can ask you where are you right now on your arm?
Okay.
And then and I think it's really nice because you have your head as the center of being aware, and then if you're super far away, then you know, okay, there are different ways to deal with this. And one way to talk to deal with, or to address people who are dissociating, is once you ask for consent to, for example, touch them, which is also pain is a physical signal of being in the present, and physical touch is also helping, but it's super important because you don't know what happened, you don't know what traumatized the person, and maybe it was being touched at the knee as the start of sexual harassment. So you should always get consent before doing this. But also talking loudly to somebody and asking them something about the presence, like where are you right now? Who am I? Who are you? What day is it? Stuff like this can also help to reconnect with the present.
Were you there when we had the last session in BHAT with Lorianne, when we were talking about conducting interviews of pushbacks and to not re-traumatize people while doing that? Because we were talking exactly about this, how to ground people and how to keep people in the present moment. Just maybe for you to make the connection. I'm not sure if you guys were there.
Was that 3 weeks ago or this week?
No, it wasn't this week. I think it was 3 weeks.
I was there, yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking, do you think that self-harming behavior is a big issue among people on the move? And also, in the case, for example, we identify just people doing this. Like, what is your advice? Like, how should we? I don't know. What should we do?
Tomorrow we will talk about how to address people, what you can do and what you can't do. I personally think this is a bit. It's also a question of your mindset maybe, but for me personally, it's really hard when I see something that that I think is not right, not in not in a sense of injustice, but if I have to do with when I deal with a person that I build a relationship to, and I have the feeling there's something going wrong. For me, in my professional career, it always turned out better to address this matter earlier on than to ignore it, or because if you don't address it, like talking about self-harming behavior, it's super difficult because on the one hand, when I take a lot of time talking about what happened to your arm, why is there a cut, how are you feeling, I'm doing exactly what we talked about at the beginning, because I'm positively reinforcing that kind of behavior because I show more compassion. That doesn't, and this is tomorrow will be very difficult because all of us need to find our personal way or our personal style on how much compassion do I want to show, how how much comforting is enough, and because in the end you need to feel comfortable with what you're doing. And for me, it was it took a lot of time to learn that sometimes being not less understanding, but less nice is the better way to deal with this in order to not positively reinforce this kind of behavior. But like there will be a whole section on this tomorrow where we have some more time for that. And if this is a big issue with people on the move, it's really hard to get numbers on that. But from when I thought about having this as a topic for a workshop, I remember when I first experienced people showing self-harming behavior when I was working in the hospital, and when I talked to my colleagues or when I talked to the teams on the field, what I get a lot is it leaves us very with the sense of I don't know what to do. I don't know. I'm sometimes I'm angry. I'm disgusted maybe by the way if somebody shows me a wound and that didn't heal well. This might be disgusting, and it's okay for you to feel these feelings and still be understanding and non-judgmental. And this is a big task that you might give yourself. But the thing is, there are more functional alternatives in order to deal with stressful situations than hurting yourself. And so, and this is why it's important for me to address this matter and to deal with this, or to support you being more. It's too late for English now. To be more comfortable or more professional in dealing with this. And from what I heard, yeah, self-harming behavior is something that a lot of people that are traumatized, that are difficult situations that people show because of a lack of or a perceived lack of other alternatives. So I think it is, and this is just a feeling that I get from what people tell me. But I think occurring more often than it occurs statistically within the group of people who are not on the move. And even if it's just if I don't have numbers to support this argument, every person that needs support because of self-harming behavior is a person who needs support because of self-harming behavior. Okay, I hope this answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I already want to not apologize, but prepare you for this is something I'm kind of compassionate about, and so maybe I get carried away with getting into examples and stuff. But that's just like, this is for me, this is a motivation and the motor in order to do the things that I do, to sometimes get excited about it. So if it's getting too much, just let me know, and I will try to break myself down, or to slow myself down, let's say it like this. Okay, any other questions or ideas?
I would just be interested in, like, I guess there's no data or not a lot of research in like things like self-harming behavior in a population like POM. But I was interested if there's also like let's just assume the opposite hypothesis. Let's assume that POM develops such a high stress tolerance and such a high level of resilience that, I mean, unless they're in a really stressful situation, that they might be considering not external but like interpersonal factors, that they might be less prone to develop self-harm behavior. Do you think if there's any ideas on that, any thoughts? I just wanted to like throw the opposite into the room one time.
Marina, do you want to say something to that, or is this something?
No, go.
Okay.
I just wanted to, like, because maybe I'll just add it in. I think like the care department in itself, like talking about this kind of thing has been in place for like 10 months now. And in these 10 months, in both Sheet and in Patras, this has been a reoccurring topic. So like from my point of view, it's definitely something that that does happen quite a lot, and probably, I mean, these are just the cases that we are attentive to, or like that we even have an idea about, and like, I don't know, thinking about all of the population of people on the move who we don't like have any access or any experience with, I can only imagine like how much higher the rate is. Also, I think, well, this is my personal experience, I don't have any numbers to back that, but I feel like, especially if you are in situations where people feel very stuck, and where they don't really feel very active or very hopeful about their efforts to cross the border, is where I personally see psychological problems or problematic behaviors rise, if that makes sense.
It's sometimes like there are some biases or misconceptions that we might have when we look at the group of people on the move, because, or like if we look at any group, for example, all those people on the move who don't show problematic behavior, they are less visible, right? And maybe there, I don't know how your relations are to like all of the people, and from what I gather, it's like more couple of hundred people, and I think there's a lot of people who don't come to the distributions, or they just come, get something, and they go away, or sometimes they talk and sometimes they don't. And then there are others who are more visible, and of course, if somebody, there might be a big number of people who actually do self-harming behavior and they don't show it, and we don't know about this. And of course, you can support somebody if they don't come. And you don't need to support somebody with their mental problems if they don't have one, or if they don't want, or if they can manage, let's say. And there's also a big difficulty in supporting people on the move, because you can only develop a post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, when that's the name of the disorder, when the traumatic event is over. When the traumatic event is ongoing, the people are traumatized, yes, but they are not yet, like, during being stressed. Our mind is, and this is why I would argue, I'm not sure if people on the move have a higher stress tolerance. It's just, while you are dealing with the stress, you are in survival mode. And this is an amazing thing that a lot of animals and like humans as well can do. You can survive in a very hostile environment for a long time, because you need to survive, because you're in survival mode. But once this is over, a lot of things just crash over the person. And this might occur, like Marina said, when you feel stuck because you can't go on game, or you kind of you're stuck in that station of your move. But unfortunately, it's not so much for us to decide. Like when I talk about us, for human beings to decide when does a stressful situation end, because the part of our brain that kind of decides that is very basic, and it's not so easily accessible. So for some people in the same situation, they might feel like survival mode is over and they can cope with the stress, and maybe they can cope with this in a healthy way, and some can't. And for others, it's an ongoing stressful traumatic situation that is triggering emotional reactions and all of this, but it's not yet over. So there's still survival mode on, and so it's different behavior, let's say. So, and of course there are different people with different resilience, and when I worked in the shelter, I talked to a group of guys, and for them, they all came from Afghanistan together, and they were just lucky. They were, I think it was 4 or 6 months that they were on the move, because they could just go more or less through everything. And then there were other guys who came from a similar area, and they arrived a year later, and they had much more stress. And you saw this in these different groups, that the ones who, for them, sorry to say that, but for them there was like a bonding moment. They were with the same 8 guys. They even had smooth sailing across the Aegean Sea, and it was kind of fun when they talked about it. And there were others who experienced being shot at multiple times, almost drowning and stuff like this. So being on the move has many different aspects to it that can be traumatizing or not. And if you have this fixed group of friends that you can talk about your problems with, or that you know that you can rely on, this is also something that's really helpful, different from people who are by themselves or feel by themselves. But I think I got a little bit carried away with this answer. Okay. Anything else, or any feedback, anything you want to say today before we close this down? Okay. I thank you a lot for your interest today, and for the contributions to the discussions. I really liked this first part of the workshop for my part. I hope you could learn a little bit and took something away for yourself. And I'm looking forward to see all of you tomorrow morning at 10. It's a different link in the other email. Yeah, and then we will talk about how to address and approach people who show self-harming behavior, try to do some exercises by ourselves, and talk also about the importance and ways of self-caring once you experienced stuff like that on a secondary part. All right? Then have a good evening, a good night, and see you tomorrow morning at 10.
Thank
Thank
Father.
you a lot.
See you tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Tomorrow.
Good evening.
Bye.
The violence in the Balkans, pushbacks every day. The traps of bureaucracy must be the European dream.